Arrow Season 6, Episode 6, Promises Kept. So I'm going to go right with what I talked about in my last review. They totally did the revelation at the end. Naturally, Slade's son saw him kill that dude in the forest, and he took his mask off and was looking around. I was like, oh, that's my dad. I knew that was going to happen. Of course it happened. That was the end of the episode, and they saved it because I was like, man, I guess I was wrong. Like, the whole episode going through, and then they get to that final fight, and it was like, I knew you as a killer before the Mirakuru, and then the revelation is revealed, and I was like, ah, there it is. He totally saw him. I was like, shocker. And that ultimately was what led his son down that path. So I thought that was pretty cool. We find out that Slade also has another son, which I thought was interesting, and his son's name, I want to say, is Grant. And that's the character that I knew from the comics, because I'm like, I don't remember this character named Joe, but Grant is the one from the comics who becomes like, basically like the second Deathstroke, and he becomes like a major villain of the Teen Titans. So I was like, oh, okay, they introduced the fact that there's like a second son out there, and I was like, that is the comic book son, because Slade does have two kids in the comics, but he has a boy and a girl. So they switched it up in this season where he has two sons instead. But I thought that was interesting. I was like, okay, that's a way to have that comic book element really come into play, which probably won't come into play for a super long time because they didn't kill Slade like they did with like the whole Suicide Squad thing, but it was clear they're kind of, you know, Slade, like they literally, the way they ended was like super dramatic, and he walks into all the steam and it's like dramatic, and it's like, I'm off to look for my second son, and then he disappears and he won't come back for like maybe 3 or 4 seasons until like the Deathstroke in the DC movies is in there and then out of there, and then it's like, okay, now we can bring the TV version back, because that's how they handle it. You know, Suicide Squad came in, it was like, buy Amanda Waller, kill her off, kill off Deadshot, disband the whole Suicide Squad, and then the movie came out, which wasn't even that great, and it's like, oh, well, that's too bad, because the Suicide Squad and Arrow was pretty freaking sweet, and now it's all gone. So, you know, that's what they do. They, you know, it's like, we don't want to have two versions. You know, we don't want to have the TV version and movie version. They can really only do that with the actual hero characters. Where it's like, hey, if you're not the main part of the show, bye, like, get the F out. Oddly enough, everything that needs to be taken out to put into the movies has all been like Arrow based, which is really funny. The whole Suicide Squad, Deathstroke now being a part of you know, the DC movies as well, and it's like, you know, once he starts coming in there, they're gonna have to, you know, well, they already did it. He's coming in, TV Deathstroke has to get out. So it's just like with the Suicide Squad. At least, like I said, it wasn't that permanent where, you know, they killed Amanda Waller and then they killed off Deathstroke and they, you know, completely disbanded the rest of the team. So it's just like, okay, you know, it's done, but Slade is still out there. He can come back. They introduced the fact that it's his other son who is known from the comic books. So when he does eventually come back, they can follow that. Hopefully they don't do that in the movies, because then they'll like never do it on Arrow. Because, you know, like I said, they're just weird like that. We can't have two versions. So, you know, he's gone for quite some time. But as far as his story throughout the episode, it was actually great. The flashbacks were him after he was rescued, because we find out finally what happened to him when he got off the island. And that was great, because I forgot that we didn't even know that, because it had been such a long time ago when that was even like a relevant thing to even wonder, like, oh, how did he escape the island and all that. And it was like, okay, yeah, the Mirakuru, and he survived and made him super powerful and, you know, not invincible, but, you know, definitely able to take some hits. Obviously he wasn't killed when he was stabbed in the eye, so it's like, okay, yeah. And then we find out that he was picked up by Aces, I believe. I don't know if they probably should switch that name because people freak out. But he got rescued, and that was where he met his son as an adult, because I assumed he hadn't seen his son since he was a kid, and that was not the case. He was rescued off of Lian, and, you know, he wakes up and it's like, oh man, you know, I have one eye and I was injured, and, you know, Oliver owes me a debt. And then as he's training with his son, that's when the Mirakuru starts to come back in, and that's when we get Season 2 Super Crazy Slade, where he's having visions of Shadow, which was super awesome that she came back. I was like, I cannot believe they got her to do a cameo, because that was pretty awesome. But we get to see him going through like those crazy moments again when he was seeing her alive, and he's freaking out and stuff, and then he's like, you know, Oliver is dead. Like, he believed Oliver was dead on the island, and he turns his head and it's like, and I love the way they did it, because he was like, Oliver Queen is dead, and then he turns and it's like, Oliver Queen is alive, and it was just a funny way to do it. But that like triggered him. That took him into the crazy version that we saw for Season 2 when he was the main villain. And I was like, this is actually really cool. We get to see that he was with his son. He made a promise not to leave him, because even though things were bad, he wasn't being corrupted mentally by the Mirakuru. He was angry, and that, it started to kick in like when they were training, with the sticks and stuff. But he was still okay, and then he started to see shadow, and it was too much. And then that combined with the fact that Oliver was alive and back home, it was like, okay, time for me to ruin his entire freaking life. And excuse me, the first thing he does, he like breaks this dude's arm, and then he throws him because he was like full on super strength. He threw him across the room. He grabs a katana and he just kills a ton of people, and he ultimately leaves his son alive, but kills a bunch of people. He's all bloodied up and everything. He takes the new suit and then he leaves, and that's how that's what led us into him being like, the big bad. So it was great to actually get those flashbacks. I was surprised by how much I really enjoyed them. But all of that stuff was really well done. Him in present day was good too, dealing with who he was versus, who he is now. So I love that. I thought it was great. And, I mentioned in my last review, his son is who he used to be. And so that's what he had to decide between. Like, do I regress back to this, or do I try to change my son into who I am now, rather than him following in my horrible former footsteps? Can he just skip over all the horrific stuff that I've done and been through to get to where I am now and just be an okay person? So, he tries, but sadly, it just doesn't really work out that way. But it's like, hey, I just gotta do what I gotta do. I need to find my second son, and that's just how it all plays out. Like, he just has to kind of go and do that. He does have a moment, early on where it was like I had to decide whether or not I was gonna choose my son over, being me, because Oliver was freaking out. He's like, Slade, like, please don't. And he was like, that was a bit close. You're freaking me out there. So I love that scene. But ultimately, Slade's like, no, I'm good, but I just have to be better. And, even now I have to just be better as a person, and now I have to find, this son I never even realized that I had. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to that. Oliver goes back to his son and sees him and Felicity oddly playing Injustice 2, which I thought was very interesting, because that is, of course, for anyone who doesn't play video games, Injustice 2 is the DC video game. It's DC characters. Like, they use Sub-Zero. They were kind of smart by replacing one of the DC characters with like a random Mortal Kombat character. But it was like they had Sub-Zero, but the other person was Blue Beetle. And they've mentioned Cord Industries, and that's where Blue Beetle comes from. And that's the Jaime Reyes version of Blue Beetle in that game. So it was like, okay, they can kind of ignore that a little bit. They could totally put it into the game in some regards, because I'm sure they say like the actual character names. It's not like just Green Arrow. I'm sure they say at some point like, oh, Oliver or Bruce Wayne or Batman, as Batman. So there's some stuff in there where it's like, even that game itself shouldn't exist at all, because they say some of the characters' actual secret identity names. So it was just funny. It's just a little, of course, Warner Brother owns it, so I was like, all right, yeah, they're playing, the actual game. They're playing Injustice 2, so I was like, all right, that's kind of funny. But everything is kind of working out for Oliver, and he's back in town. And then of course we have the other half of this episode, which is Diggle deciding who he's gonna be, and it was great for him as well. Like, he goes through the process of using the last little bit of the drug that he had, and then the main villain that they end up fighting in this episode turns out to be the supplier. It's his supplier. So he has to take out his own supplier, and by the end he has to reveal it to the team, because it's like, I was willing to run into that, that fire before it blew up, in our faces. I was willing to run into that to get that drug, so that I didn't have these tremors, so that I could be, top notch. I could actually be Green Arrow like you guys needed me to be. So that was actually really cool. I like the fact that he went through that. We saw Lila, which we hadn't seen her in forever. So I was like, oh man, it's Lila. We also got to see his son. So I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. He talks to her first, and then once everything gets like super crazy, because he was like about to go into a fire and die in an explosion for this thing, he does reveal it to the rest of the team. Like, this is what's been happening. It's been happening for a very long time now. And, it's like, all right, well, we'll figure this out. Curtis even says, like, I made something that helped a woman walk. I'm pretty sure, I can help you with some tremors. And it was like, yeah, he probably should have thought of that. Like, I didn't even think of that until he actually said it, because at this point it was like, man, Diggle's doing drugs. It wasn't even in my head. Like, why didn't he just go to Curtis and Felicity? Like, they do have, like, a whole walking system for Felicity. Like, EMPs will knock her down, but she can walk because Curtis made this device. Like, he helped her make this thing. So yeah, Diggle wasn't really thinking. It was just, crap, I can't be who I need to be, so he went straight to the drug, or the steroid. But definitely a great episode for them, and they have that little hint where it goes back to Dinah being the one who's lying a little bit, where she has the little little matchbox, and it was like a brand new one as well. So I was like, okay, so they're, still in contact. It wasn't just that one moment. Like she had a brand new one that she got from Vigilante. So I was like, all right, so we'll see how that plays out. It will be fairly relevant. Like they just kind of hinted at it in this one, but he'll be coming back fairly soon, I guess. But definitely a great episode for both Slade and Diggle, them dealing with who they are versus who they should be. And I love that. I thought it was great. The flashbacks were some of the best. Like we don't really get flashbacks anymore because we've gotten up to the point of, like we surpassed it. Like we got to the point where Oliver officially left the island, so there are no more island or Hong Kong flashbacks. So this was really cool. These last 2 episodes with Slade having some flashbacks, I loved it. I was like, that's actually really awesome. It's no longer a part of the series anymore, so it was cool to have that come back, and it felt like old school stuff. Like we even got, the shadow appearance because of Slade going through the issue with the Mirakuru. So it was like, that was actually cool. We had some cool flashbacks come into play, so I love that for sure. Diggle's storyline was definitely great, and they're kind of moving towards the resolution of that issue for him, and now they kind of go back to Dinah having the issue, and then next week we have Oliver being arrested again. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but that should be fun. All in all, this was a good episode though, so I would love to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below, let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it, and I'm just going to ask what you guys think is going to happen in the next episode. Like, I would love to know your thoughts and theories and hopes even of how in the world this next episode is going to play out, because this woman has not been playing, and now she's got Oliver, and I'm sure she's just going to say, you were this version of Green Arrow, and now Diggle is the newer version, because he doesn't use a crossbow. Super obvious, by the way. Or he doesn't use a bow and arrow, he uses a crossbow. So, super obvious stuff there. So, she's got these connections already, like the real easy superhero connections, like I mentioned in the last one. Like, oh, Dinah, you seem to disappear, and then Black Canary seem to show up. It's just so crazy. So, I would love to know your thoughts on how this next episode is somehow going to work for them. I just can't wait to see how they manage to get out of it again. So I would love to know your theories on how that's going to play out. And of course, would love to know what you guys thought about this episode in general. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.